Hi, and welcome to another edition of Studio 411. I'm your host, Larry De Silva. Well, you would think that the power was out, but no, we're here. We're not doing radio. We're actually doing television today, and we thank you for joining us. We have, as always, it's always a great pleasure when we have a past guest. Even after their first experience, they come back and join us for more. It's great, you know, electrical power outages and all. We've got a marvelous guest, Sylvia Mims. She's got a new CD here. A project called Rhapsody and Technicolor, and it is a wonderful CD, and I've had the great experience to really kind of pour into it over the last several weeks, and now we're going to listen from the singer herself. Yes, a little bit of jazz and a little bit of R&B. Ms. Mims, welcome back to Studio 411.
Thank you so much, Larry.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be back.
I know. How come the rest of us get older and you're looking younger with every appearance?
Not really.
No, I'm telling you, it is.
Wait
till you see some of the photos we have. Look at, starting with this one here. Look at this shot here. This is some photo we've got here of Sylvia. Now tell me. Of course, you did your inaugural CD several years ago. Talk me through a little bit about how this project came together.
So 2014, I did Where Lovers Live, which was very traditional. And then in 2015, I knew I wanted to start working on something else. But I wanted it to be a culmination of a lot of the different things that I enjoy doing, hence the jazz and some R&B and that sort of thing. And so I approached Matt DeChamplain, who is a wonderful jazz pianist.
A former guest on this show.
Who's been a guest on this show as well, and asked him if he'd be interested in working on some arrangements with me. And so we got together, and in 2015, I'd say the end of 2015, we started working on those arrangements. We went to the studio, I believe, January of 2016 with him and a bass player, Matt DeWanzik, and then a great drummer by the name of Curtis Torian. And we put a few things down. A few months went by, went back into the studio, did a little bit more work. 2016 came to an end, 2017 started, I went back in. So I took my time with this project. I did a lot of studio work and then listening. Studio work and then listening, because I wanted this to be Sylvia. I wanted this to speak to who Sylvia is.
Yeah, and I mean, we were saying off air, I hadn't seen you, although it didn't feel like it, in almost 2 years, and I kept wanting to pick up the phone saying, you know, when is this new CD coming out? And I thought, what's the hang up? But obviously in this case, believe me, the finished product shows that a lot of TLC went into this project. It really is good.
A lot of time. I wanted an experience. It's titled Rhapsody in Technicolor. It's because it's got a full range of color. There's a bit of swing, there's some bossa nova. I brought in a bunch of different musicians. I have a violinist, Jason Anik, who did a beautiful job, a wonderful classical guitarist, Cesar Garabini.
Make sure you mention them all, because these people all deserve a mention.
Right, they all do.
When you win those awards, make sure
exactly.
you
Josh
have your
Bruno,
notes.
who played trumpet on an R&B piece we did. Then there's Tabor Gable and Jonathan Barber. Tabor Gable played piano, and Jonathan Barber played drums on House of the Rising Sun and What You Won't Do for Love. And they came and spurred the moment. It was a funny story. We originally had a set trio: Matt DeChamplain, Matt DeWanzik, Curtis Torian. But for whatever reason, we needed these two songs, House of the Rising Sun and What You Won't Do for Love, quicker, and we were recording in the city. So it was difficult for Curtis Torian and Matt DeChamplain to get into the city because they live here in Connecticut.
Sure.
And so Matt DeWanzik, the bass player, said, I've got these two guys who live here in the city. I'll give them a call and we'll bring them in. So sure enough, he gave them a call. They showed up. They hadn't seen the music. We gave them the music. We laid it down right then and there. I think we did 2 takes. And the take that you hear, I think, is the second take on the CD.
Now, in your relatively young recording history, I mean, do you find that you like less takes, or do you find that a lot of times songs, for whatever reason, just, I mean, if everybody's kind of on the same page, kind of like on this show, you know what I mean? Then things go a lot smoother. I mean, so, or
right.
Was there one song in particular that just you had difficulty kind of nailing down?
On this particular CD, no. I do tend to prefer 1 to 2 takes per song. You lose the spontaneity. if you do too many takes. Over time, it gets tiring. You can start to hear the musicians, everyone gets a bit tired. So you want that freshness, so you want the first or the second take. And once in a while, you'll get just one take and you'll say, that's it. And in fact, I believe it's Wild as the Wind. Re-recorded that one recording, and that was it. And then we later brought in the violinist to do his part. But as far as the trio and myself, we just laid it down in one take.
We're going to talk about some of these songs. Kind of, I have a little bit of history on each one, and kind of, my thoughts are, what I perceived as I was hearing, these great tracks. I do have a trivia question for you. I'll give it to you now. 2 songs on this CD were co-written by the same lyricist. Do you know who that is?
Trying to think of who that is.
Well, you mull it over. I'll give you I'll give you the answer at the end. Maybe Don will know. Don Trenner is going to be joining us in a little bit. Of course, Don has been on this program a couple of times before and worked on this CD with Sylvia, of course, longtime mentor in many ways to Sylvia, the Emmy-nominated composer, band leader, author. So again, he'll be joining us to talk a little bit about working again with Sylvia, as well as some memories of some people close in their musical lives, we'll say. Let's start with A Day in the Life of a Fool. Again, that was, as you talked about, that's like a classic bossa nova song. Tell me a little bit about that. I know it was from a movie in the late 50s called Black Orpheus.
That's correct.
I want to make sure the pronunciation of the gentleman that wrote the song.
Louis Bonfa?
Yes.
Yes,
yeah.
Right. It's actually titled Mariage Carnaval, and the translation or the English version has been renamed A Day in the Life of a Fool. And Cesar Garabini is a person that I found on YouTube, maybe 2014. I was looking for a guitarist who could play Brazilian music. And I just put in Brazilian guitarist in New York City. And he was the first person who popped up. And he had this beautiful, beautiful sound. And so I contacted him and I said, I'd love to meet you and see if we could do some things together. So we met up, and then I booked him for a couple of gigs in the city. And then when I decided to do this project, I called him up and I said, would you like to do a couple of tunes on the CD? He said, sure. And so he came in and we did A Day in the Life of a Fool with him and bass player Matt DeWanzik. Yeah. And it's just beautiful.
It's great. It's great. And
really
of course,
stunning.
that song is considered one of the premier Brazilian jazz songs of all time.
Yes,
so it's
indeed.
good. We're going to say in a minute, we've got a couple of tracks from the CD to hear. The first one we're going to talk about first is, of course, the classic, The House of the Rising Sun. Many of you know, of course, Eric Burdon and the Animals. They put some different lyrics, different, obviously, beat, and what a classic performance they did. You went back and actually got the original traditional, they considered a folk song. Which was actually based on a song called Rising Sun Blues. And so tell me a little bit, how did that come about was that, I think you had performed that, prior to starting this CD.
I had performed it at the Met Room in New York City on occasion. And I know the Animal version, but I always loved the version done by a really wonderful folk singer by the name of Odetta. And she had this really beautiful trio that made it really spacious and kind of did this 3/4 waltz. So I thought, I want to do something kind of similar. And so when I started working with Matt DeChamplain, he kind of tweaked it a bit and made it modern. Yeah. And then when I got into the studio with Tabor Gable and Jonathan Barber and Matt DeWanzik, and they just sat down and played, and it just blossomed. It was beautiful. We all just gelled right there in the moment. And it's so modern. And even I had a radio station host who said to me, she said, I can't believe that you took that folk piece, that really ancient little tidbit, and you made it modern. Yeah. The players just did a spectacular job. And I love the ending where Tabor Gable, it sounds like the sun is rising. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous
And for those who
moment.
don't know, the song is basically a song that tells about a life gone wrong in New Orleans. So,
Correct.
you know, and we're going to pause. We'll come back with Sylvia Mims. We're going to check out a little montage we put together over the song track from the CD. Rhapsody and Technicolor by our good friend Sylvia Mims. We're going to check out The House of the Rising Sun on Studio 411, and then we'll be back.
There is a house in New Orleans they call the Rising Sun. It's been the ruin of many poor girl, and I am only one. If I had listened to what my mama said, I'd have been at home today. But being young and foolish, let a gambler lead me astray. My mother, she's a tailor, sold those new blue jeans. My sweetheart, he's a drunkard, drinks way down in New Orleans. Go tell my baby sister, never do like I have done to shine the house in New Orleans they call the Rising Sun. One foot is on the platform and the other one is on this train. I'm going back to New Orleans, can't get rid of my ball and chain. I'm going back to New Orleans. My race is almost run. I'm going back to spend my life neath the house of the rising sun. Neath the house of the rising sun. Neath the house of the rising sun, down in New Orleans, house of the
Back with Sylvia Mims here on Studio 411, the House of the Rising Sun. Great, great track. And again, of course, you know, it's terrific when an artist can put a spin on a classic song. And for instance, probably bad example, but I think it's a pretty good one. You know, Joe Cocker's version of "With a Little Help from My Friends," or "The Letter" by originally the Box Tops. Different genre of music, but the point is, it doesn't diminish the other versions that you've heard, but it just, you think it's a totally different song, and that's what you've done with a lot of these. What I'd like, and as we go through some of these songs, you just started with mentioning Odetta on the House of the Rising Sun, is knowing a little bit about your background and from when you were on the last time. With each of these songs, I kept saying to myself, well, you know, I wonder who inspired her, you know, or this one. Like, I have some ideas, but then, you know, I want to hear it from you, because I know you have a lot of people, and I'll throw a couple out, and then we'll cover them later. Like, of course, Nancy Wilson, who we'll talk about later. I thought of some of the Carmen McRae, and, you know, countless others, male and female. So again, it just, it was kind of like listening, saying, oh, I wonder what inspired her to do this. And I said, well, there you go. She'll tell us all about it here on the show. Beautiful Love. That's a song that was originally composed by Victor King, Victor Young. I remember a gentleman, he was a guitarist named Joe Paz, who did a lot of work with Ella Fitzgerald,
Yes.
especially on the old Pablo label when I was in college back in the late 70s, early 80s. And I love the line. He performed it at a concert venue called the Brecon Jazz Festival, if I'm pronouncing it right, in 1991, not too long before he passed. And he couldn't remember the name of the composer, so he goes, well, it's Victor Herbert, Victor Young, or Victor Mature, one of those. But tell me now, where did that song come about, you know?
That song, I've been playing that out for a while now. Yeah. I remember hearing it played by Bill Evans, the wonderful
pianist, yeah.
Superb jazz pianist. And I just really gravitated towards the tune, so I'd been playing it out for a long while, and I thought, let's go ahead and incorporate this into the CD. Let's do something fun with it. And so Matt DeChamplain worked his magic and came up with this really different take on it.
We have a photo of Sylvia in the center, and then Matt DeChamplain, of course, has been on this program before, as well as Don Trenner, if we can pull that up just so we can give folks a little bit of perspective on Matt. Just remind, oh no, that's the other one. That's actually, oh, that's Matt. Yeah, Matt's on the left. And then that's, who's the gentleman second from left?
Curtis Torian is the drummer, and then Matt DeWan.
Who's that blonde woman there?
I know. Change in look
and then
there.
Matt, who I've met. I met him at a place where he and Don and Michelle Brett were doing a little fundraiser, and Matt is a wonderful individual.
Wonderful bass player.
Yeah, and again, the thing is, to get back to the other Matt DeChamplain, you know, he's just got, like, you know, all sorts of great ideas in his head. I mean, as you worked with him for several years.
He's a phenomenal player. The musical vocabulary that he has, it's unbelievable. And his gift is stride, which not a lot of pianists do any longer.
Right.
But he plays one hell of a stride piano, and he's played so much lately that he's become a monster. He's just a monster. We've had a gig, I think it was in June, in Stamford. That trio, Curtis Torian, Matt DeWanzik, and Matt DeChamplain. And I hadn't played with Matt DeChamplain since we had done the recording. And whoa, they had me working. They were smoking.
There you go. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, they play it smoking with Chris a lot. So
Yeah,
there
they
you go.
indeed
So there you
they
go.
do. That is
Smoking
true.
literally and figuratively.
Exactly.
And also one other thing, I was surprised that song, Beautiful Love, I don't remember it in the movie, but the original Mummy in 1932 that was used in that movie, and then talk about years later was used in a Woody Allen movie called Crimes and Misdemeanors. So the song's got a lot of legs, and these are like kind of nuggets that I just thought to myself, man, she must have been like really just, you know, putting little slips of paper in a drawer with these songs that you wanted to do. I mean,
You know, it was just, it just whatever felt right. There, we had a list of songs that we knew we wanted to do, and then as we went along, I maybe would adjust slightly, but for the most part, most of those tunes that are on there, they ended up on there. I added a couple here and there. It became a larger list, and I ended up, I think, with 15 tunes, which is quite
and
lengthy.
I like that because that nowadays you really, I've said behind the scenes to some people over the years that 8 or 9 tracks. I mean, 10 is like old school. It's got to be 12 to 15, and believe me, with the numbers you've got, I mean, it feels like you're listening to like a double CD.
Yep, that's exactly right.
That's good.
That's exactly right. No, I wanted to give people a good sampling and not be. I didn't want to like cheap out.
Oh, hey, give them their money's worth.
Right, right. And I enjoyed doing the project. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed being able to share the musicianship because there are so many wonderful players out there, and I wanted to showcase those players, and I think that we were able to do that. I think everyone is really well.
Oh yeah, no, you got a good contingent of people. I love how you got that one gentleman by basically what was it, YouTube? You saw him and then sent them an email, and that's great.
So we've known each other for a while now. In fact, he and I are working on a project together, just a duo project,
See?
the classical guitarist.
Now as these folks all come together, as well as Don, who we'll talk to in a little bit, all of a sudden it'll just be like the projects will be coming fast and furious.
Oh no! After this one took 3 years. So
well, the next one better take a year and a half. Okay, we need to pick up the pace. We need to pick up the pace. Sylvia Mims joining us here for the hour on Studio 411, her new CD project Rhapsody in Technicolor, and give the website. I neglected
www.sylviamims.com.
Simple enough. All right, very good. Another one, Wild is the Wind, movie music from an old, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing, Anna Magnani and Tony Franciosa movie.
Italian,
written by, not written by, actually performed by Johnny Mathis, which was a little departure for him. Nominated for an Oscar back in the late 50s. Tell me about that song. I know another one, probably your favorites, Nina Simone recorded it twice.
Yes, she did.
So was that kind of like what you remember her recording? Or?
No, it's funny. I know that version very well, but I just always liked Wild as the Wind. I'd heard various performers do it, in particular a singer by the name of Jackie Ryan, who's out of San Francisco area. And I always thought it was just a beautiful piece. And I knew I wanted to use a violin on this particular CD, and so I thought, wouldn't it be lovely if we really slowed down Wild as a Wind and made it really breathe and brought in a violinist, and so that's what we did. And
yeah, and the violin really stands out, especially like even towards the latter part of the song.
Yeah, it's just.
And what I was surprised doing my research on this tune, apparently it was recorded, and I did find a video of it by the late great David Bowie.
Yes, and that's how a lot of people know it. In fact, my husband, that's how he knew it was.
But when I heard his version, just to show you again what I mean about how interpretations vary, it didn't sound anything like any of the versions, whether it was yours or Johnny's, and I just thought, well, in its own way, that's a credit to to he or anyone else that does it. They kind of put their own spin on it.
Definitely, definitely,
Yeah.
That's important.
Another one, a ballad you did called "Sometimes I Wonder Why." Tell me how'd that come about.
Growing up, I was a big fan of the R&B singer Anita Baker.
Yes.
I used to perform a lot of her songs, and so I thought, I've got this music here because I have the sheet music for it. Let me try this out with Matt DeChamplain, and so we did a duo performance of that. And we kind of changed the tempo. Her tempo is a ballad, but we changed this up. So it kind of sounds like you're in a honky-tonk in 1925, and it's got a really different vibe. And I like the end result. I love his solo. I think
And part of the reason that, it's funny you mentioned honky-tonk. The song was co-written by a guy, Michael something Reed, middle name. And then I looked up and I said, why does that name Mike Reed ring a bell to me? He's a former NFL football player. He was back in the 70s, he played with the Cincinnati Bengals, and then in the early 80s, he became a songwriter. He wrote some great songs for Ronnie Millsap, a song called Inside, Stranger in My House,
I know that song,
that earned him a Grammy. So in other words, yeah.
I
mean,
didn't know that he
yeah,
had been
no.
an athlete. I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
I mean, Michael Barry Reed, and I just thought, Mike Reed, and I said, the only Mike Reed I remember, like I said, he was a linebacker or something with the Bengals, and then he decided to retire, which probably was a good career move for him. And then, yeah, so you chose well from Grammy nominated, Oscar nominated, a lot of folks.
Yeah, a lot of different folks, yeah.
All right, well, we're going to bring him in. We'll continue our chat with Sylvia Mims, but right now we have the great Don Trenner joining us. Don, of course, worked with Sylvia for many years. He always has great things to say off air about you. I don't know about on air, but we'll bring him on. Don, welcome to Studio 411. Larry DeSilva and Sylvia Mims. How are you, sir?
Hi, Larry. So glad you're still doing arts and music. Good for you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. How you doing? Good to have you back.
I'm fine, thank you. How about you?
Very good, very good. Now tell me, you worked with Sylvia on this CD, Rhapsody and Technicolor. You worked on a few tracks. Tell me your thoughts about putting this marvelous CD together.
Well, first of all, let me tell you that the world's greatest musical instrument is the human voice, and she's blessed with one of the great ones. Sylvia is a dear, dear, wonderfully talented person.
Thank you so much, Don.
Don Trenner joining us here on Studio 411, talking about his assistance on Sylvia Mims's Rhapsody and Technicolor. Don, talk a little bit about some of the songs that you worked with Sylvia and kind of working with all these great young musicians.
Well, she did an album some time ago. We've worked together now for several years. She's a joy and she's an incredible talent. She did a CD called Where Lovers Live, and there are a lot of my songs on that, which is including the title song of Where Lovers Live. And then she did another CD recently, and I did a couple of tracks on that one with her. One of them is a new song that I wrote recently, and I think The Nearness of You. You're lucky to have her there, Larry.
Oh yeah, yeah. Now tell me that we'll start because we're going to play the cut that you and Don did with Here I Am With You. We'll hear that later. But The Nearness of You, I thought it sounded familiar. An old song by Hoagie Carmichael.
Correct.
So tell me.
Very good. You're doing very well.
Yeah, well, that's Don and I's song. That's our personal song. We play that one out a lot, and there's something that's just really special about that tune. And so I remember we were at the Hartford Library doing the Baby Grand Jazz series a couple of years ago, and I remember we did that. It was actually the three of us, Matt DeWanzik, myself, and Don, and we performed The Nearness of You. And I remember a woman came up to me and said, "That was anointed." And I thought, wow, that really came across, because that's how I feel when I perform that piece with him. And that's how I feel when I perform with Don in general. But that song, The Nearness of You, there's just something very special to me about that. And it's always going to be mine and Don's song. And so I was pleased to get it on a recording.
And that works perfectly into my, I had given Sylvia a trivia question. And you know those young people, I don't know, but I'll ask Don if he knows it. I assume Don has heard most of this CD,
yes.
Correct? There are two songs on this CD that were co-written by the same lyricist. Do you know which two they are?
No, offhand I can't answer that.
There's a song, let's see if I can get it right here. There's a song called Wild as the Wind, which Sylvia and I just talked about. And there's a song, The Nearness of You. This lyricist, unbeknownst to Sylvia, the same lyricist on both songs. The reason I wanted to bring it up was to see if you knew, and secondly, I bet you Don probably knew the gentleman. He's a native of Scranton, PA. I'll give you that much of a hint. So
Well, continue. I love learning about it.
He co-wrote The Nearness of You with Hoagie Carmichael, and he co-wrote the song "Wild Is the Wind" with Dmitri Timkin.
Yeah, I don't remember the
No?
lyricist on.
Okay.
I thought it was Timken. I thought he
Yeah,
did
no,
both.
there was a lyricist was this gentleman, and I thought, let me ask Don after I stumped you, because Don may have known him, because Don has known everybody.
Yes, Don.
You know,
knows.
And the lyric writer was
the lyric writer on both songs was a gentleman named Ned Washington.
Yeah.
oh sure.
Now, did you know Ned?
I met Ned once, but we weren't great friends. Ned's a wonderful lyricist.
Yeah, and I'm, as I said, a native of Scranton, PA, and I just thought, how crazy is that? Because, you know, you must have been drawn into each of those songs, and, you know, it was kind of like Bernie Taupin to Elton John. You know, you get a good lyricist, and then the works just seem to flow out of these people, and so, yeah, there you go.
Sure.
So there's my my useless piece of trivia for the show. But no, I thought it was pretty cool. I thought it was cool.
Well, I'll tell you something else about a lyricist as long as we're talking about it.
Sure.
I wrote a bunch of songs and I put them away into a filing cabinet, and somebody said, you better get those out. One of them is Where Lovers Live. The lyric writer for that was a gentleman named Tony Valona. He was a wonderful lyric writer. However, he wrote also a song where both the melody and the lyrics were his, and that was, oh, geez, I'll think of it in a minute.
He just stumped himself.
Yeah.
By the way, Don, are you working on that second book yet? No, because I asked because I know your assistant is like, I haven't talked to Liz in a while. His assistant is a wonderful lady, Liz Coburn.
She's after me to do one called Don's Rolodex.
Absolutely, my goodness. No, that's a great. I can just visualize those old Rolodexes just loaded with names, and what's great about it is that a lot of those folks are still around, and you know, again.
Yeah, a lot of them aren't.
No, but you know, it's. I know we're all getting there, Don. Trust me. The only one that's staying young in this group is Sylvia. You notice Sylvia? She's like the picture of Dorian Gray. Honest to
The
God.
song I was thinking about was Lollipops and Roses.
Oh, I don't know
remember that
one.
song?
No, I know Lollipops and Rainbows. That was Leslie Gore.
Lollipops and Roses.
Really?
And that was Tony Valona's song and lyric.
There you go. All right. Let's see. We learned something new here from the legendary Don Trenner here on Studio 411. We'll get back to Don in a second. Tell me another great song that I knew it and I couldn't piece it together that you did, Sylvia, was Fragile, which was written by Sting.
Correct.
And again, just, you know, that song has quite a track history because it was, I don't know if you knew this, it was inspired by an American Peace Corps volunteer in Nicaragua.
Correct.
Named Ben Linder, who unfortunately met an untimely end. And Sting wrote this song, I guess, in the mid to late 80s. And then it resurfaced again after September 11th, 9/11/2001. And again, just a great tune. And he was always proud because on the original track he played the guitar.
That's right.
Which I didn't picture Sting being kind of like have a jazz feel to him. But
No, he's a great guitarist.
yeah. So now tell me about the same gentleman that you got before that played on
Right,
this track.
Cesar Garabini did the classical guitar, and then Jason Anick on violin, and then Matt DeWanzik on bass. And
Yeah.
Matt DeWanzik was the one who arranged that piece for me.
Nice.
He brought up the tempo a bit, and it really flows. It has a gypsy jazz feel to it, which people have enjoyed. Let's put it that way.
And now, was that a song that you used in your repertoire? Did somebody say, hey, you got to do that song?
No, that was one that I always wanted to do. And so when I started putting together what I wanted to do with the recording, and I knew I was going to have the violinist and the classical guitarist, I think it might be nice to have something that just has all stringed instruments. So the bass, the guitar, and the violin, and of course the voice is a stringed instrument. So that's where that came from.
There you go. Another song that you do on the CD, again, Sylvia Mims joining us here for the hour on Studio 411. I didn't know what time it was, and a song that I knew Frank Sinatra, Pal Joey, but again, Richard Rodgers and Lawrence Hart. Don, did you know Richard Rodgers? Did you ever get a chance to meet him?
No, I didn't meet him. Of course, I know of him, but I didn't meet him.
There you go. And tell me a little bit, Sylvia, about that. Again, was that something that you did in your shows?
I did. I tend to do that one in my shows, usually as a waltz. And so we go back and forth in that one. I don't know if you noticed, but it goes back and forth between swing and 3/4 time.
Yeah.
Swing 3. So it was kind of an experiment. And we had done this recording. We'd recorded it a couple of times, maybe 3 times, I'll say, when we went into the studio. And the studio guy said, why don't we finalize with we were doing, I think, 3 or 4 songs that day. Why don't we just go ahead and do each of the songs over again, but do them in order as though you're actually performing them out.
Right.
So we went ahead and we did that. And when we got to this one, I didn't know what time it was. The bass player, Matt DeWanzik, he was the one who counted it off. Well, he counted it off really fast. But we went ahead and we did it. And then it was so funny because at the end, the drummer, Curtis Torian, said, man, that was really fast. The next one coming up, I have a drum solo. Don't count mine off that fast. So I remember that when I left the studio, and so I started listening to everything. And I kept coming back to this one that was so fast because it just had the energy that I wanted from it. And so that's the take that I went with. So it was just a funny story that it wasn't, the intention was not for it to be that fast.
But it's good because you want an equal balance to some degree on any project, CD, LP, as many people call them still, of kind of ballads and up tempo. What I noticed with yours, because again, you bring in so many elements. You bring in the bossa nova, you bring in that gypsy sound that's really, I don't even know how to explain it. It's just really hooks you in right away, and it's terrific. Another one too, a song called "Morning," which I wasn't familiar with. That's another Latin jazz standout written by an American pianist, composer, arranger named Claire Fisher. Am I pronouncing it correctly? And that's got kind of an Afro-Cuban thing going on there. And tell me a little bit about that.
I've performed that for many years, for a long time, since I was in LA. So that was back in the 90s that I was performing that one. And I just always loved the feel. And
let me interrupt enough to tell you that Claire Fisher was an amazing talent. I knew him very well. He lived in LA, and he did so many wonderful things in music.
There you go. And now the thing that caught my ear there, and I don't know, again, this song, when I hear it, the beginning of it reminds me of Stevie Wonder's "Don't You Worry About a Thing." Am I wrong or no?
But there wasn't any intention there.
No, I know, but I'm telling you, listen to it. It really, yeah.
Funny. But yeah, sometimes those things happen.
Yeah.
Exactly, without any intent.
Well, because there was mention that the song, there's a section in the song that they said came from Stravinsky's "The Rite of Spring," which again would be like a public domain piece. And then I thought, wow, maybe they both drew on something from that song, but it really it gets you going, right?
It gets moving. Yeah, no, that wasn't the intention. I just think there's some similar chord changes there.
Hey, there's only so many chord changes in this world, and then I'm still trying to get over George Harrison getting sued by a song that had nothing in my mind to do with My Sweet Lord. To me the whole thing was a travesty. But so Don, you ever have that problem where you said, geez, I'm writing a song and it sounds too much like a song that I had in my head by somebody else?
Everybody's song sounds like something else. There are only 12 notes.
There you go.
It's just how you put them together.
That's right. Now,
Larry, tell me something.
Yes, sir.
Did Sylvia tell you the uniqueness of our meeting?
No, go ahead.
Okay,
share that with our audience.
Because it involves someone you know.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so Dawn and I met in, I think it was 2012 or 2013 when Marilyn May, the really wonderful...
Oh, yes, Marilyn called into the show.
Yeah,
great.
cabaret jazz singer. She was giving a master class in Stamford, Connecticut at the Palace Theater. And so I decided to attend to see what it was all about. And at that event, Dawn was the accompanist. And so I got up and I performed a couple of tunes, one of which was The Nearness of You. And after I finished performing the two, he leans over to me and he whispers, "I was Nancy Wilson's musical director." And I was just in awe
Yeah.
because Nancy Wilson is my everything. And the fact that he could hear Nancy Wilson in what I did really spoke volumes for me. So I got his number and I said, oh, do you mind if I call you sometime? He said, sure. Well, it took me a year to get the nerve up to call him to say, do you think you would work with me and do something
Yeah.
with me or whatnot? And I did. And the rest is history. We've worked together so much. We've recorded 2 CDs together. We've played out at various locations. We're really good friends. He's one of the best people that I know. He's just.
I wanted to bring that up because as I had emailed to Don was that the fact obviously that's like kind of probably the ultimate inspiration for you. And of course then, you know, Don, as was mentioned in his book when he was on the show the first time, having worked with Nancy. And of course Nancy passed away in 2019. You know, again, Don, share a couple of stories about your longtime friend and collaborator, Ms. Wilson.
Nancy Wilson was a very, very important part of my life. It was a very difficult loss for me. I called her over the last 2 years, and it was almost impossible to talk to her because she had advanced emphysema. And people said, well, did she smoke a lot? Probably she did, but I cannot remember seeing her with a cigarette. But nevertheless, she suffered a great deal. She was an incredible talent. Music was so easy for her. It just flowed off of her back. Amazing. Some of the best things in my life, in my career, happened as a result of touring with Nancy Wilson, particularly internationally. We did a lot of international travel.
I was going to say now, and I'm sure Sylvia will laugh when I say this, but I mean, I think it would be just such poetic justice. You should really do almost like a tribute album of songs, because I'm sure you can name them. I know Don can, because he probably knows every note, you know, her big hits and songs that she did over the years. Any thought to doing a project with just Nancy Wilson material?
Well, we already did.
2 or 3 years ago, we
did. The
did.
Metropolitan Room in New York.
Right,
and
we did a
tribute to Nancy.
No, I meant a recorded tribute, a CD.
I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I would love to do that.
It's okay with me. I'll meet you in the studio.
Nancy Wilson is. I grew up with Nancy Wilson in my household. I learned about her from my parents. They had her records when we had records. And I remember just gravitating towards that voice. It was so sophisticated and elegant and so expressive. And then when I was in college, I got to go see her perform live, and I was just so in awe of her as a performer as well, a live performer. So I consider her my musical ancestor. There's a lineage there. Her mentor was Dinah Washington, and if you listen to her, if you listen to Nancy Wilson, you can hear a lot of Dinah in her. And now
That's right.
I have
absolutely.
Nancy Wilson-isms and a bit of Dinah Washington. So it's funny. So there's this musical ancestry that goes on with singers, and even though we're not related, there are certain things we pick up from one another, just like musicians pick up different things from
We'll start with Don, because obviously he worked with her, you know, night after night after night. You know, like how, for instance, when the late Sam Cooke would perform, they always used to say about Sam that, you know, he just sang. He hardly moved his arms. He wasn't like a Bobby Darin kind of flashy guy. He just stood there flat-footed and just sang. With Nancy, I always got that impression that she always seemed like she had her body arched when she sang, or maybe that was to hit certain notes. What do you remember about her performing? I mean, did she just kind of stand there, or did she have a certain...
Oh, no.
Yeah.
She became very physical.
Yeah.
She used to do a thing with the microphone that kind of aggravated a lot of people. She would flail the microphone around in front of her mouth, and the sound would go in and out. But nevertheless, the talent quotient there was totally amazing. And she was a wonderful, wonderful person. I go back in my life with her to her husband, Kenny Dennis, who is still alive. He was a drummer. and I think he's connected with the Los Angeles Union, and her son Casey, and the three of them look like a magazine cover. I mean, three beautiful people.
There you go. And how about you? When you would see her, do you ever remember like seeing her, Sylvia, like on a television show, or like what was your first, like, was it just a recording of her that you remember, like the album or what it was that you that turned you on to her?
Oh, yeah, my parents had various albums that I would listen to, and then when I was in high school, I went and we had CDs. I went out and I bought this 4-disc CD that had just a comprehensive list of songs that Nancy Wilson had done, and I played those 4 CDs for years and years. In fact, a lot of the standards I know are because of listening to those 4 CDs by Nancy Wilson.
We have a shot, by the way, I forgot, we have a shot of Sylvia probably just before she bought her CD. I don't know if we have that. It's as a young girl. And maybe she's walking on her way to her nearest CD store. I don't know. Do we have that shot? No, maybe not. Okay, but anyway.
Sylvia is a young girl.
Yes, she is. Yeah. I said, yeah, she's 28. There it is. Look at that, huh? Is that something? Oh, my goodness. Don, when we send Don a copy of this, he will say, wow, there you go. There's a star in the making right there. I'm telling you.
Let me tell you one thing about Nancy. There was one, I did many albums with her. But one that I remember particularly, and I used to call her after I was listening to it, and she said, you know, Don, I think that's the best singing I ever did. She did an album called Lush Life, and the arrangements, some of them were Billy May, and it's an incredible, well, it was a vinyl, of course. I'm sure it's a CD now, but it's called Lush Life, and she also sings that on it, you know.
Couple of songs as we wind down the hour here with Sylvia Mims. Of course, the new CD, Rhapsody and Technicolor, as well as our old friend Don Trenner calling to spend a few moments with us talking about Sylvia, as well as his work with her and also work with Nancy Wilson. You do a couple of tunes here. You do Michel Legrand's I Will Wait for You, which again, I remember that movie, believe it or not. I think I was in those same kind of shorts that you had there. I was a young boy, and I think in school we watched that Catherine Deneuve movie.
Yeah, the umbrellas.
Yeah, I'm not sure why, but that was a must-see. It was.
That was a great movie.
It was a great movie, yeah.
And you do one here that is a song that I thought was fantastic. And again, Don probably knew the gentleman. Strange Meadowlark, which was another one that Dave Brubeck did with Carmen McRae. So there's that thread running through there. Actually written by Don's wife. The song, the lyrics, and then of course as we wind down, Nature Boy, which has a whole marvelous story behind the scenes, Nat Cole, which is a breathtaking song, and of course then Old Devil Moon, which from the Finian Rainbow, Broadway, and then later the motion picture. So you've got quite a variety of songs going on. It's just terrific. Real quick, we've got just a minute and a half left. Don, Here I Am With You. Tell me a quick story. How did that song come about?
Well, I wrote the song with an idea, and I wrote the opening lyric and the closing lyric, but I'm not a lyric writer. So I delegated the responsibility to a friend of mine by the name of Fred Haas, and he wrote the rest of the lyrics. So that's the story of it.
There you go. It's terrific, and we're gonna check that song out. I just wanted to read a quote real quick. Scott Yanow, who's the jazz journalist, historian, author of 11 books, including The Jazz Singers, said of this CD, Rhapsody in Technicolor is one of the finest jazz vocal albums of the year, serving as a perfect introduction to the artistry of Sylvia Mims. And I will have it on my turntable or desktop CD player for quite a while. I'll block everything out just to hear this great CD. Sylvia, get going on that next project so we can have you back on.
Definitely.
And Don, you hang in there. But again, my thanks for taking a few moments to join us, and we look forward to having you back on as well with another project.
You're a very smart fellow, Larry.
Don't say that to my wife. All right.
I don't know your wife.
No, yes, you did. You met her, but that's for another time. Another time. All right. We thank you all for joining us here on Studio 411. We're going to leave you with a little montage and track of "Here I Am with You" with Don Trenner on piano and the great Sylvia Mims. Larry
Bye,
DeSilva, thank you.
Sylvia, I love you.
I love you too.
There you go.
Don.
See, I don't get that, but they're like kissing cousins, these guys. We thank you for watching Studio 411, and here's "Here I Am with You." Take care.
First a glance, then a dance. Is it romance? That first touch, and we were lost, and the love we'd sought was so close, and your wise eyes said so much. Our first kiss, lost in bliss, could we miss this? Love appears and takes your hand, walking side by side. The dance begins, and so could it be true? Took a chance on a glance. Here I am with you. Our first kiss, lost in bliss, could we miss this? Love appears and takes your hand, walking side by side. The dance begins, and so could it be true? Took a chance on her